Sally, you're on.
All right. Happy holidays, everybody. So nice to be with you again this month. We look forward to hearing the stories, to have your participation, and thank you so much for coming. And we're in for a real treat to hear Kurt. We've been together for a long time, and he was one of my first storytellers. So I'm going to turn it over to the co-chairman here, Liz Nichols, who will introduce Kurt, and we'll start on our way.
Thank you, Sally. Well, welcome everybody. This is a really lovely gathering. And one of the reasons it's lovely is that we have Kirk with us. He hasn't been with us for quite some time. But Kirk asked me to say, to make sure to mention that our swap was one of the first swaps that he came to tell a story. And I remember being completely blown away by him. And
Me too.
Yeah. And so, you know, so many of us know and love him from Stagebridge. And if you haven't met Kirk before, you're in for a real treat. Well, we're all in for a treat tonight. So I love some of the things that Kirk said on his website, which Kirk, if you want to put your website in the chat, and please do. But so I'll read a little. With a lifelong love of story, literature, and the performing arts, Kirk has been immersed in these arts forms for over 20 years. He summons all of his God-given talents and masterfully fuses them together. Spoken word, rhythm, music, and movement. And his stories are always, the experience is always wonderful. He has been really honored by the National Storytelling Network. He's been the recipient of the very prestigious J.J. Renault Emerging Artist Grant a number of years ago. And performed at the Storytelling Festival. And as most of us know, he's also the former storytelling director at Stagebridge, and has told at many other, it's told everywhere from big festival stages to classrooms, churches, libraries, you name it, where they need stories, Kirk is there, and we need your stories tonight, Kirk. So we're just so thrilled to have you. Please tell us, I heard 2 stories.
Yeah, thank you, Liz, and thank you, Sally. Thank you so much for having me. It's so much fun to be back. Like Liz said, that was one of the first swaps I went to so many years ago, and always so welcoming, And this is such a great group. I know so many of you, and those I don't know you, I hope I have the pleasure of getting to know you as the time goes on. And I want to share just 2 stories. I know the time is somewhat limited, and I want to make sure I leave room for all the other wonderful stories. And let me tell you just a little bit about this instrument that I grabbed that some of you may not be familiar with. It's called an ngoni. It is a West African instrument. It is the instrument of a griot, so it actually goes back 13th century. So it's a very old instrument made out of a gourd covered in goat skin. And this is a very simple one, 6 strings, but there's some that are 8 and 10. And of course, it probably reminds you of the very complex kora, which is, I think, 26 strings or something like that. But I'm just going to kind of use it to help me tell this one story I've been working on. So just sit back and relax and come with me. Once, many years ago, in the African country of Ghana, there was an old man who had 7 sons. For after his wife had died, he had become both father and mother to the boys. And they were handsome men. They were tall and strong. Their skin was smooth and dark like the finest mahogany wood. Their arms and legs were long, strong, like the spears of a warrior. But there was disappointment in the heart of the father. You see, within the walls of that house, there was always quarreling, fighting, fussing. They would fight over everything. And any of you that are parents or grandparents or you yourselves may remember with your siblings, there can sometimes be a lot of quarreling. And there were 7 of them. And they would fight over just about anything. Sometimes even like the weather. It's hot, the oldest one would say. Let's go in from the fields. I am tired of working. It's just too hot. Ah, it is not hot. I feel a cool breeze coming, said the middle child. We will work. You are just lazy. And then even when the sun began to go down, they would fight over that. The second son would say, ah, it is almost dark. We have put in a good day's work. Let us go inside. And then the third son would say, no, 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 no. We have at least an hour of work, an hour of the sun. We will continue to work. And they would fight over everything, even dinner. They would go in the house. Their father would prepare a meal for them. He would set the food in front of them. And the youngest would always say, I don't have enough food. I can't eat this. There's not enough food for me. Father, you did not give me as much as my older brothers. That's not fair. And the father would say, I put the same amount in all of your plates. I will starve with this amount of food. And the older brother would grab a handful of meat from the younger brother's plate and said, well, give it to me then if you don't want to eat it. And so they would fuss and quarrel and fight. Sometimes they would fight all night long. They wouldn't even finish quarreling until the sun had come up the next morning. One sad day, the father died, and he was buried the very next morning. And the sons were grieving for their father, and they were called before the chief of the village, and he told them, your father has much property and wealth and possessions. And they began to whisper among themselves who would get the inheritance. I am the oldest, said the oldest. I will get the possession. I am the youngest, said the youngest. I will get the possession. Well, I am my father's favorite, said the middle child. So I know I will get all of his possessions. And they began to fuss and fight and quarrel. And there was scratching and grabbing and hitting and kicking and hands and feet until there was a big old pile on the floor. Stop it! Enough, said the chief of the village. Sit! And all 7 sons sat listening, ashamed before the chief. Your father has indeed left instructions, and I will tell you this. He wanted to divide all of his wealth, his possessions, his property equally among all of you. However, you must complete 2 tasks. The first, and he reached down in the bag and he pulled out a spool of colored thread, this blue thread. And then he pulled out another, black, green, yellow, orange, white, red, until there were 7 spools of thread in front of him. And he said, you must turn this thread into gold. And for the very first time, all 7 boys were speechless. They didn't know what to say. For the first time, there was no fussing, no quarreling, no fighting. There was confusion. But how? How can we turn thread into gold? The second task, the chief said, is you must not quarrel. You must learn some way to make peace with yourself before the moon comes up tonight and the stars sparkle in the sky. You must turn this thread into gold, and not one time can you fuss or quarrel or fight. If I hear about it, your father's inheritance will be given to the poorest in the village, and you yourselves will be turned out as beggars. And so in silence, each boy picked up a piece of a spool of thread, and they walked home quietly, contemplating, wondering how can they solve this riddle. And when they got back to their farm, it was the oldest brother who said, let us make peace with one another today. And they all grabbed hands and they held each other tightly. The only way we'll be able to solve this riddle is if we work together. There must be unity, or we will fail at this, my brothers. Our Father would not have told us to turn this thread into gold if it were impossible to do. And then the sixth son, he said, perhaps there is gold woven within the thread. And they each held up the thread as the beams of sunlight were coming to the windows, and it did seem to glow and radiate, but there was no gold in the thread. And the youngest said, what if we were to make something with a thread? And that's something we could sell in the marketplace, and perhaps that is where we will get our fortune, thereby turning it into gold in a matter of speaking. That is a good idea. But they looked at the 7 spools of thread, all these different colors, for the Ashanti people only wear one solid color. They would not know what to do with something that is multicolored and there's not enough thread to make one piece of cloth. Then we will make the most amazing fabric in all the land, and everyone will want to buy it. And so the brothers began to put together a new loom, and each of them took part in building this loom, and together they took the thread and they began to weave. And when one got tired, the other picked up, and they began to weave with all the different colors, lines and patterns and shapes, until soon it looked like it was taking on the shapes of the wings of a bird. And they wove and wove until it looked like the sun was just beginning to make its descent, and they knew they did not have much time. And after they wove and they wove, eventually the beautiful cloth that they had never seen before came from the loom. Ah, it is beautiful indeed. Nothing like this we had ever seen. And so they folded up the cloth, and it was so much of it that it filled 7 baskets of it. Each of them put a basket on their head, and they went to the marketplace as quickly as they could. People began to gather around them. Ah, what a beautiful cloth. How wonderful, how amazing. They all began to finger the cloth and feel its softness and look at its beauty. And from the back of the crowd, this man with beautiful robe pushed his way into the front, and they separated him. And he was the treasurer of the king. This is the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. This will make a wonderful gift for the king. I must have it all. And the brothers whispered together and huddled and talked among themselves. And then they said to the king's treasurer, cloth that is worthy of the king can only cost what a king can pay. It will cost you 1 bag of gold. The villagers began to gasp in disbelief of them asking for this, but the man, without hesitating, said, it is done. I will take it all. And he presented them with this large bag of gold, spilling it onto the ground, and began to sparkle and dance and shine in the light. And as the brothers picked it up, and Phil picked up the bag of gold and filled it back up, it took 3 of them to carry the bag all the way back to the chief of the village. They spilled it out on the floor, and it was the youngest who said, we have turned the thread into gold. You have indeed learned your lesson well. And then it was the middle child who said, we will get the inheritance, but what about the poor of the village that you mentioned? What about them? And the oldest one said, perhaps we can teach them to turn thread into gold. And the chief said, indeed, your father taught you in death what he could not teach you in life. You have learned your lesson well. And so it was from that day forward that the brothers stopped quarreling with one another, and they learned a new word, emoja, unity, working together. They knew they could accomplish anything. And from that day to this, there's been peace within the walls of that home.
Yay.
Thank you.
Yay. Yay, Kurt.
Thank you. So that is a story. Actually, it's based on an African tale, and it's called Seven Spools of Thread, and it's a Kwanzaa story. One of the principles of Kwanzaa is umoja, unity. And so this second story I want to do, one I haven't done in a long time, so I hope I remember it all, but it's a really fun story. For those, I always like to mention this, just for those of you that may not know, because I learned this myself after I started playing the banjo, is that the banjo itself, it comes from African American tradition, Old South, and it is based in or influenced by old African instruments. It's very similar to the one that you see. And that is where, even though the banjo is an American South instrument, it was influenced by the instrumentation of old instruments such as the ngoni. And so that is why I just love to play that. It's just the culture of not only African American, but also Africa itself. And so I just like to use it sometimes to help me tell my story. Sometimes acoustics are a little bit funny with the Zoom, so I'll try to balance it out and hope you can be able to hear me and the banjo doesn't throw it off. But this first one is it's a pourquoi tale that I love to tell, because storytelling is education as well as entertainment. And this story educates us about the turtle. Little known fact, long time ago, turtle shell was it was smooth. It was clean. It was clear, like clear waters on a lake. Not like how it was bumpy and broken into pieces today. Well, back then it was smooth, and turtle, he loved his shell too. Matter of fact, many animals are walking down the street, he'd stop him. He said, hey, how you like my shell? And he'd look at those animals, he'd say, look at my shell, ain't it fine? Wish you had a shell like mine. Mm-hmm. Come on now. Mm-hmm. Look at my shell, ain't it fine? Wish you had a shell like mine. Mm-hmm. Sure is a mighty fine shell, ain't it? Well, one day, Turtle and his good old friend Possum were just taking a walk in the woods, just enjoying themselves. Nice, sunny day. When Turtle spotted a persimmon tree. Ooh, I don't know if you ever had persimmons, especially when they're sweet and ripe and juicy and Ooh, and Turtle loved eating persimmons, but he wasn't so good at climbing trees to get them because, well, he was a turtle. But his good old friend Possum, he shimmied up that tree, snatched a persimmon up, and started eating it. And Turtle like, hey, Possum, why don't you throw me one of those persimmons down?
He's playing.
So Possum held it way up and whoosh. And Turtle's waiting down below and he said, gulp. And then he held up another one, whoosh. And Turtle said, gulp. And so they're like, whoosh, gulp, whoosh, gulp, whoosh, gulp. And they were just whooshing and gulping and eating their persimmons, having them a good old time until the wolf came. Yeah, wolf came with his big old tongue hanging out, shiny sharp teeth, and his belly was empty and looking for some persimmons. And so Possum, he had enough sense to throw them persimmons down. And so he held one up for the wolf. He said, whoosh. Now, wolf didn't do no little bit gulping like that turtle. He was a big old fella. So Wolf was like, go, like that. And so Possum said, whoosh. Wolf said, go, whoosh, go, whoosh, go, whoosh, go. Now it seemed like Turtle wasn't bothered by things at all. But after a while, he just looked over at Wolf and he said, it ain't fair. And Wolf said, what? What you mean it ain't fair? It ain't fair. Possum, he keep throwing those little turtle-sized persimmons down, and Wolf, he's a big fella. Possum, why don't you throw down some wolf-sized persimmons? Now, Wolf, he thought that was a good idea. He said, yeah, Possum, don't be holding out on me. Possum, quit fooling around, throw me those persimmons down. Oh yeah. Possum, quit fooling around, throw me those persimmons down. Yeah. So Possum looked at Turtle like, you sure about this? Because those wolf-sized persimmons, I mean, they were like wolf-sized persimmons. And Turtle just kind of winked and nodded. And Possum said, you sure about this, Turtle? And Turtle just smiled and nodded. So Possum went and got one of those wolf-sized persimmons. And he held it up. And he looked down at Turtle one more time. And he looked at Wolf. And Wolf was like, and Possum let that persimmon go. And Wolf was waiting down below. And he said, and that persimmon got stuck in his throat. And he looked up at that possum. He said, I'm gonna get you, Possum. Now, Possum had enough sense to stay up in that tree. But the turtle was standing right next to Wolf, and he said, I'm gonna get you, Turtle. Now, that turtle ran as fast as he could, which wasn't very fast because he was a turtle. So he said, no. And that wolf snatched up that turtle. He brought him to his house. He got a big black pot. He got water in the pot. He's got it boiling with a nice high hot fire. He said, now, turtle, I'm gonna put you in that water. Make me some turtle soup. You ain't gonna treat me like that. Still trying to get that persimmon out of his throat. And so Turtle, he didn't seem bothered at all. He was just as cool and calm as he could be. Wolf said, didn't you hear me, Turtle? I said, I'm gonna make me some turtle soup. And Turtle said, I'm a turtle. I'll just kick out my arms and legs, break your pot in pieces. Didn't think about that, said the wolf. Then he saw the fire. Now, right by now, the fire was burning so high and so hot. Wolf says, I'll just put you in the fire. Make me some barbecue turtle. What you got to say about that? And Turtle said, I'm a turtle. I'll just duck in my shell, roll around, and put your fire out. Wolf says, didn't think about that either. And so Wolf looked around it. He saw the river rushing by real fast and real hard. He said, all right, I got it. I'm gonna put you in that river. Treat me like that, Turtle. I'm gonna put you in that river. Now what you got to say? Now Turtle's eyes, I mean, they got big. They got real big. And Turtle said, no, not the river, Mr. Wolf. Not the river. Go ahead and throw me in the water. Go ahead and throw me in the fire, but please don't throw me in the river. Throw me in the water, boil pop. Throw me in the fire, might singe my top, but please don't throw me in the river. Throw me in the water, bubble boil pop. Throw me in the fire, might singe my top, but please don't throw me in the river. Please don't throw me in the river. That's exactly what I'm gonna do, said the wolf. He picked up that turtle. He was like, 1, 2, 3, whee! And and that turtle went flying towards the river, and he was just about to land in the water, but there was big old rock right on the bank, and turtle landed, crack, splash, and slid on in the river. He was down there for a long, long time. And Wolf was all excited. And finally, Turtle popped his head up, looked at Wolf. He said, thanks for throwing me in the river. No place like home, Mr. Wolf. Thanks for throwing me in the river. He swam on across to the other side, finally got out, and his back was all aching and hurting. He looked behind his beautiful smooth shell. It was all cracked and broken in pieces, like pieces of a puzzle, just the way we see it today. And Turtle's shell has been that way ever since. And now you know why. Thanks for throwing me in the river. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Kirk. That was fantastic.
Wonderful. Yay.
Hard
Thank
not to
Thank
see.
you. Let's like another big round of applause. Unmute yourself.
Woo! Hey, Kirk.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Fabulous.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Fabulous.
Great.
Fabulous. The music and the stories, how
Wow.
beautifully they go together, and how you bring your talents to just make the story shine. And yeah, thank you. Gorgeous. So that's just the beginning of a wonderful night of stories. Those were traditional stories, and we've got all kinds of stories tonight. We've got personal stories, family stories handed down in the family, literary story, all kinds. And our next storyteller, Rupa, is going to share a personal story she calls Back Home. Rupa Mohan from Walnut Creek.
Hey, Rupa.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Namaste and happy holidays. It's so good to be with you all today. Just this year, in October, we went back to India after 3 long years of waiting, thanks to the pandemic. And I was delighted because we were going back at a very festive time, Diwali, our festival of lights. And I had not been home for Diwali in over 30 years. So
Wow.
this was going to be very special. And as we got ready for Diwali on the 24th of October, the whole city of Chennai, where I was from originally, was filled with an energy, and everybody was getting ready. There were going to be firecrackers this year. And on the eve of Diwali, we set little lamps out to welcome the goddess of good fortune. And we also, burst firecrackers. And I, like a little kid, I got to do all the sparklers. The next morning, we had to get ready and wear our new clothing and go and visit our relatives, especially the elderly ones, to get their blessings and to exchange gifts. So off we went, my husband and I, and we started out with his elderly aunt, who actually was a very youthful 85-year-old. And I knew that besides the blessings, I would also get some comments. She took one look at me and she remarked, "Rupa, I can't believe this. What happened to you? You have gone gray." And well, this was pretty customary. Over the years, I had heard elderly aunties remark, "Rupa, you've become so thin. You've put on weight. Did you get a nose job?" Well, so it was all meant to be coming from a good place, and we didn't think of it as any kind of shaming. But this one took me by surprise. Of course, she looked very youthful, and she probably was in a time warp, thinking I was still that young girl with long braided black lustrous hair. Of course, I was aging too. I mean, I'm no spring chicken. So I just went along with it and smiled, and I said, not everybody can look as youthful as you, auntie. And but I have been wondering what to do about my emerging salt and pepper. And I must confess, I did try a few things. I was warned that I should not use shampoo or the hair dryer, but how was that practical? When I moved to this country, I chopped off my long hair and I decided to make life easier for myself. Maybe I paid the price for that by turning gray, or maybe it was just my genes kicking in. I don't know. So soon I was starting to dabble in a few herbal remedies. I started out, of course, with henna, which comes from India, but I became a carrot top a few times and I didn't like that look. And then I tried this Indonesian product called kaka, which funnily in our own Indian language is slang for poop. And my kids laughed about it, but I was pretty committed to trying it. It turned out to be a two-step process. You start out with dabbing a green paste, then you wash it off, and then a brown paste, and then you spend the next 2 hours cleaning the bathtub. So this was not going to be my thing. So I just decided to age, gracefully and embrace my emerging grays. Well, what could I do? I was wondering, was I going to go over to the dark side? Maybe not. A friend of mine told me that in her city in India, it was considered very middle class to color your hair. And her elite friends, they flaunted their salt and pepper. I'm no snob, but I kind of thought that was interesting. And then my sister, who is very hip, told me, I love your salt and pepper. This is the look all the youngsters are trying to get now. So just stay with it. So that endorsed it. And I was going to stay firm. And the feminist in me also started speaking up. When my husband turned gray and everybody was remarking how distinguished and handsome he looked, I'm going like, why should I be discriminated against? That aunt should have picked on him instead of me. So I kind of was, not going to change my mind and cave in. I also thought about some role models from history, going back to the 9th century in South India, when there was this Chola dynasty, which was a very, very important period for patrons of art and culture. And that's when the beautiful temples came about and people were writing poetry. And, it was a height of civilization in South India. There was a young lady called Avai. And she was very devout, and she also was like a emerging poet and loved, hanging out with the elderly saints and, singing the praises of the gods and everything. But her parents, of course, wanted to get her married like it was customary as soon as she became a teenager. Now, Avai prayed hard for a solution. And guess what? One morning she woke up and realized she had turned completely silver. And she had grown wrinkles and a stoop, and she was ecstatic because nobody would force her to get married. And she could wander around all over the countryside carrying her cane without any fears, singing her songs, composing poetry, and of course, telling a lot of stories. She has become a legend, and even today, her poetry and her stories are considered timeless and absolutely amazing piece of Tamil literature. So I thought, I'm neither a poet nor am I devout, but when I go stand outside under the sun in tropical India, where my hair tends to be very frizzy because of the humidity, I develop a silver halo. And maybe I appear to be older and wiser. And the other role model I thought of was more recent, our esteemed Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. I'm sure you've all heard of her. She was very popular when I was growing up. And I still remember her having this tuft of silver hair that distinguished her from all the ordinary people. In fact, she was so powerful that men would literally shake in their boots. She did become unpopular later, but I will never forget this vision of her. Now, I was going to return back home to California soon, and I had to get ready for portraying a 74-year-old woman in one of my story opportunities. And I thought, I don't have to buy a wig. I don't have to dab on any more of those greasy, hair color things. I can just be myself. So that endorsed it even more for me. And when I came home, I was jet lagged and my hair was all disheveled. I went to Trader Joe's to pick up groceries. And the young man at the register, unsolicited, he remarked, "I love your hair." Well, that clinched it for me. I was going to embrace my salt and pepper. And when I welcome the new year, I know I'm going to become more salty than peppery, but I am going to stick with it. And I am also going to make sure that no elderly aunt ever hair shames me again. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupa. I love how in your personal story, we got historical stories too. And also, I think you've got quite a few of us here who are prompting ourselves. So we are in solidarity. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we have Jane Cole, and she is going to be sharing stories from back about 100 years ago in her family, the winters in Pine Ridge, Oregon, and how those stories have passed down to her. So isn't that special for the we've got a lot of stories of the season of the festivals of lights and the snow and the cold. And anyway, Jane, let's hear about Pine Ridge, Oregon.
Okie dokie. Well, my mom was born in 1918. Her name was Dorothy Thomas, but her family called her Dottie. In the early 20s, her family moved to the west from Missouri. Her father was a saw filer in the logging camps and lumber mills, and they followed that work around Northern California and Southern Oregon. When she was about 9 in 1927, they moved to a little logging town, Pine Ridge in Oregon. It's up around the northern end of Klamath Lake, and not so far out of town from a small town called Chiloquin, was on the Klamath Indian Reservation. These are Dottie's memories of Pine Ridge in winter. Pine Ridge was cold in winter. Their house sat right next to the Williamson River across from the lumber mill. Dottie had 4 brothers, 2 older and 2 younger, and her father made her a room of her own, but it was on the back porch, and that back porch was screened in. Her father took down the screen and just nailed up some boards. There was no insulation. It was freezing out there. It could be 12 degrees. She hated going to bed in the winter. She would whine and complain and stall. She would say, "You love George and Jade more than me. You let them sleep inside, but you make me go out there." Her father would say, "Get out there and get in bed." And that was all there was to be said. Well, her mama loved her up, helped her change into her flannel nightie, and got a hot water bottle ready and would take her out to tuck her in. They piled so many blankets on her that she said it was so heavy she couldn't hardly turn over. And her flannel nightgown stuck to the flannel sheets like Velcro. It was not her favorite. If she needed to go to the bathroom in the night, there was a, a commode jar, a pot there by the bed, but she would avoid that as long as possible. They had an outhouse and she wasn't going out there in the winter. In the morning, she would jump out of bed and run as fast as she could inside to the wood stove. She and her little brother Jade would change into their clothes right beside the big wood stove in the living room. Her outfits in winter consisted of long underwear, a slip, a heavy dress, and long stockings that went all the way up each leg, covered with thick wool stockings that came almost to her knee, just above the top of her lace-up boots. She wore sweater after sweater, and she did have a coat, but they had no rain gear, nothing that was waterproof. In Pine Ridge in winter, it snowed. They had to walk about a half a mile from the house through the snow down to the company store. For a while, a taxi would come from Chiloquin to pick up the Pine Ridge kids and take them into school. Later, there was a school bus, but it had no heater, so the ride to and from school was bone chilling. At school, the classrooms had a cloakroom in the back of the room, and there were lines and lines of hooks. The kids would come in and peel off their layers of clothing and hang them on the hooks. Dottie and her girlfriends, Darlene Warren, June Duval, and Dorothy Jane Mockabee, would take the time to roll down their long lisle stockings and roll up their long underwear so that you could not see long underwear sticking out from under their dresses. Darlene lived in town and she knew that wasn't fashionable to see long underwear. At recess and lunch, all the kids were back in the cloakroom, piling on the sweaters and the coats to go outside for lunch and recess. In Pine Ridge, the kids, in Chiloquin, the kids had a sled run that started way up the hill by the graveyard, came down the side of the school, made a quick corner around in front of the school, and you could go all the way down to Main Street. If you could make the whole sled run, you were a good sledder. The high school kids made a ski jump in town, and some of them got so proficient that they made it to championships at the state level. Pine Ridge also had a sled run, but it wasn't nearly as steep. It ended right in front of the company store, but there was no traffic, so the kids didn't have to worry about cars at all. Now, Dottie's father somehow got a hold of a great big toboggan, the kind you could hitch behind a horse or even a car. It could hold 6 or 8 kids. Each kid would climb aboard and wrap their legs around the kid in front, and then wrap their arms around the kid in front. Dottie's father would hitch the toboggan to the back of his car and drive slowly around the roads in town, and the kids would have a wild ride. Dottie said they'd be whooping and hollering and singing songs, and in general, just trying to draw as much attention to themselves as they could. One day, after a chilly ride home on the bus to Pine Ridge, Frank and Ralph, Dottie's older brothers, and Dottie found that the snow was waist deep. Frank led the way, tromping and stomping and kicking the snow to make a path for Ralph and Dottie. Dottie was feeling really cold and became very sleepy and tired. She shuffled along behind the boys and got further and further behind. She looked over at that beautiful, soft, fluffy white snow, and she thought, oh, I'm just going to lay down here for a while and take a little rest. And she did. When the boys got in the house, their mother said, well, where's Dottie? And the boys said, well, she was right behind us. Dottie's mother grabbed her coat and ran back down the trail. She couldn't see Dottie anywhere. She kept on. And finally, there was little Dottie, curled up in the snow, asleep. Dottie's mother yanked her up out of the snow and shook her awake and hustled her all the way back to the house. She sat her on a chair in front of the wood stove and rubbed her and jiggled her and loved her up and wrapped her in warm towels until Dottie finally thawed out. Dottie loved to tell this part of the story. She said, and I had no ill effects, except that might be the reason I'm so dumb. But then she would look at you and say, but I did graduate with honors from San Francisco State College, and laugh and laugh. Around the time that little kids start to doubt the existence of Santa Claus, Dottie's parents conspired to try to keep her believing for another year. Right before Christmas, Dottie's mom dragged her off to go visit the Gillespies next door. Dottie hated going to the Gillespies. That was where her arch enemy, Donald Ray Gillespie, here we're required to go. lived there, and he was so mean to Dottie. She hated him. So she was very uncomfortable and agitated and whined and complained, trying to get her mother to go back home. Dottie's mom stalled and delayed and extended the visit as long as she could manage, with Dottie becoming more and more urgent to get home. Finally, Dottie's mother gave in and back they walked. Right as they got up to the front door, Dottie saw her father through the window, and he was assembling a doll baby buggy. Dottie said, "That cinched it. I knew there was no Santa Claus." For their Christmas trees, they would drive up higher in the mountains, Dottie, her dad, and her two older brothers, Frank and Ralph, and choose a tree and cut it and bring it home. They always chose one that was almost as tall as the ceiling. In those days, they didn't have electric lights to decorate the Christmas tree. They had a little candle holder with a clip on it, and you placed a tiny candle and clipped each candle in its holder on the end of a branch. Dottie said those candles were so dangerous. She can't believe they used them. Their friends, the Maccabees, one Christmas, the tree caught on fire, and the family grabbed the tree and threw it right through the glass window and out into the snow. Fortunately, because they acted so quickly, not much was damaged in the house. They didn't catch on fire. But that was an exciting Christmas Eve for them, and certainly a cold one. Dottie's family tradition was to open presents on Christmas Eve. The children were shooed back into the bedroom, and their mom and dad would gather the gifts and light the candles all in their little holders all over the tree and turn out the lights. Then the children were invited in. And for that moment, before the chaos started, they all stood together in the dark. And every little candle flickered and glistened off the ornaments and lit their tree. And outside, the frost and ice grew on the sides of the Williamson River, and the meadows and forests were covered in a white blanket of snow. And the mountain peaks, icy and cold, lifted up into the night sky, and the sky was full of pinpricks of light and went on with millions of lights off into the stardust.
Oh,
Winter seemed very long in Pine Ridge, but she liked to brag that sometimes they saw snow on the 4th of July, and then you might see snow again on Labor Day.
wow, Jane,
Wow.
thank you. Ah, this is so wonderful. So, didn't we all feel like we were there? You took us back in time.
Great time.
So beautiful, and how
Thank you.
it has changed. And I really enjoyed that, especially because since I never celebrated Christmas in my family, you brought me in, and I really appreciate it. That experience that I feel like is almost a rite of passage for most people in this country of discovering that there is no such thing as Santa Claus is something that I never have.
What?
Ever. No, because we knew there wasn't a Santa Claus all along because we were Jewish. Santa Claus didn't come to our house. So, but the magic of the season I would like to share a story, a Hanukkah story that I feel has a little of that magic in it. And it's by Isaac Bashevis Singer,
Oh,
the wonderful Nobel Prize winning author, who was born in Poland, 1903, and moved to the US for all of his adult life. But he wrote mostly for adults, but he also wrote some stories for children. And some of them are collected in a book called The Power of Light, 8 Stories for Hanukkah. And I love that he frames this story that he heard it as a boy growing up in a small town in Poland in a religious family where he went to a cheder, a religious school for boys, one room, one teacher, and one Hanukkah on a cold night. The teacher was teaching the boys about Hanukkah, and some of them were saying, and of course, Hanukkah is about a miracle that back in the over 2,000 years ago, the oil that was to reconsecrate the temple after the Maccabees defeated the Syrian king's troops and reasserted their right to their own religion instead of worshiping the gods of the Greeks. That a little bit of sanctified oil that should only last long enough for one night lasted for 8. So that's the miracle we celebrate on Hanukkah. And some of the students were saying to the teacher, well, why is it that back in the old days, back in Bible times, there were miracles all over, but where are the miracles now? I've never experienced a miracle, said this child. And the teacher said, listen, God doesn't make lots of miracles. If he did, we wouldn't do for ourselves. We wouldn't think for ourselves. And he wants us to do that. But sometimes only a miracle can save someone. And that's when miracles happen. Oh, really? Come on. I'll tell you, this happened in our own town. You see, when I was a boy, I heard this story, and it was about a family that had lived not so long before. You see, they were a happy family. The father, Falik, the mother, Sarah, and the 2 children, the older boy, Manis, and the little sister, Simka. And everything was good for them. They were healthy, they were happy, they had a good business, a store that supported them very well. They had a comfortable life. All was good until one year when everything turned bad. First, the store burned down. And of course, there was no insurance in those days. They lost everything. But much worse than that, soon afterwards, Sarah, the mother, became gravely ill. And with no doctor in the town in those days, she died. And once she died, Falik, her husband, well, he seemed to be sick too, but people weren't sure. Was it sickness of the body or of the heart? But he just got weaker and weaker. He stopped eating, he stopped going out, he took to his bed. And so there was no money coming in. And how were they to eat? How were they to get fire for the fireplace? Well, they had to start selling all the lovely things they had had in their house. First, some of the furniture, the good china, all the things they had been passed down in their families. They had beautiful silverware. And it was Manis, the older son, it was his job to go to the moneylender and sell these things and get enough to buy something to eat. But winter was coming on and Hanukkah was almost here. And they had nothing left of all those things to sell except for their most important family heirloom, which was a menorah.
mhm.
Now, this is a menorah. I think most of you, can we see it? Yeah. Oh, it's hard to see with that I got in Israel a few years ago. You know, it has room for 9 candles on it for the 8 nights of Hanukkah, plus the shamus, the helper calendar candle. Well, that's a nice one, but that's nothing compared to what theirs was. It was incredibly ornate silver, worked into beautiful designs, you know, deer and trees and grapes and flowers and birds and just magnificent. Well, there was no food in the house. So Manas went to his father on his bed and said, "Father, I think it's time to sell this." "No, you can't, you can't. God has commanded us to light the lights of Hanukkah in memory of this miracle. You can't, we somehow have to wait until the holiday is over." Well, Manas didn't know how he was going to do that, but he had to obey his father. So he took the little bit of money, the few coins that they still had, he went and instead of he bought a stale loaf of bread, and then he bought some candles and some matches and he brought them home. And the children put the candles in and brought the menorah to their father on the first night. And he could barely sit up in bed to say the prayer. And in a weak voice, he said, "Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam." Somebody help me. Come on. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
Kidshanu b'mitzvah.
I know the prayer. It just went right out of my
And
Shel Hanukkah, right? And lit the candles. Amen. And sank back, looking as if that effort had just completely almost destroyed him. And then the children went and they did the other thing that God has commanded us to do, which is to put the menorah in the window so that everybody can see and remember. And then they left their father and they went and they sat at the dining room table, and they couldn't help it. They burst into tears because sitting there, they remembered how last Hanukkah, the house had been warm with a blazing fire, but more so warm with their mothers bustling around the kitchen, getting ready to fry the potato pancakes in oil to remember the oil and the miracle of the lights, and singing Hanukkah songs, and how their parents gave them nuts and Hanukkah gelt, a little money, so that they could play the dreidel game, where you spin the top and win and lose. And this year, none of that, nothing. The dreidel sat on the table. When they saw it, it just made them burst out in tears again. And as they were sitting there like that, they heard a knock on the door. Now, Manas, the son, he hated when he heard that knock on the door lately, because it was usually some kind neighbor coming to offer them some food, to give them some charity. But his father always said, "No, no, don't open the door. Don't, please tell them we don't need it." And so he didn't want to open the door, but he did. And he opened the door, and first he saw that it was snowing. It was blowing so hard that snow was coming in, but it was not anyone he recognized standing there. There was in the distance a man, a huge, big man with a big, tall fur hat, a black, beautiful wool coat with shiny brass buttons and a fur collar, big, shiny boots, and a big mustache. And Manas saw what kind of man he was. He was a squire. Not a squire like King Arthur's knight squires, a squire meaning a local nobleman, a Polish Catholic nobleman who the Jewish people in town barely ever saw. They might see his carriage going through town. You didn't want to see the squire because usually if you saw him, it was not good. Something bad was. But here he was, and he had a big smile on his face. He had brushing the snow off his shoulders, and behind him, the children could see this beautiful set of horses with a sleigh like a big toboggan with the bells twinkle, and it was unbelievable. Just never seen anything like that. What was he doing at their house? But Manas had learned some Polish from working in the store with his parents. He invited the squire in. Why are you here? Why are you here? Well, I'm here because as I was driving by, I told my driver to stop because I saw in your window that incredible candle holder. It's magnificent. Where did you get it? Well, Manas explained how it was a family heirloom. I thought so. Nobody makes work like that now. I want to buy this from you. But first I need to ask you, like, it's very confusing to me. There is room for 9 candles, and yet I only see 2. Is this some weird Jewish custom or what? Well, Manas explained the whole story of Hanukkah and how each night we light 1 more candle until the 8 nights, just like it happened back in those days. And the squire said, very interesting, very interesting. Well, this makes it even more valuable to me to know this story. And I have here a purse. There are 500 gold coins in here, but that is not enough. This is worth 1,000. I don't have 1,000 with me. I can come back in a few days with the other 500. But first, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I see here, you're telling me this is a festival, but I don't see any celebrations. And they explained, the children, through their tears, how they usually celebrated, but this year there was nothing to celebrate. Their mother was dead. Their father was sick. They had nothing to eat. He said, I'm sorry to hear that. And then as he looked around, and he saw that on the dining room table was this top, this dreidel. And he asked what it was. And they told him about how they played dreidel and how each side stands for one word in the phrase, a great miracle happened there. Shin, Gimel, Nun, and Hey, the Hebrew letters. And I showed him. And he said, teach me. We can't teach you because we have nothing to play with. No, well, look, here I told you I have this money. Here's some for you, and some for me. Now play. And they played. And now you may be a believer or you may not be a believer, but if you had been there that night, you would have believed in miracles, because every time the children spun, it landed, so they won. But every single time the squire spun, he lost. So that in an hour, all the gold coins were in front of the children and none in front of the squire. Well, he stood up, he said, I'm out, I've got to go. But don't worry, I'll be back with that other 500. And also don't worry, your father will be well, you will all be well, and happy Hanukkah to you. And with that, he threw open the door and he went out, and the children just stood there in shock. And they listened, waiting to hear those jingle bells of the sleigh moving away through the snow, but they didn't hear it. So they went and they opened the door. They didn't see the sleigh. They didn't see any tracks through the snow, even though the snow had almost stopped. Everything had vanished. And they thought to themselves, we must have been dreaming. We're so hungry. We've hallucinated. But when they turned back to the table, the gold was not a dream. The gold was real. They scooped it up and ran to tell their father. About this miracle, but when they got in his room, they saw a much greater miracle, because the man who they had left on death's door an hour before was sitting up. He had color in his face. He was a well man. And that's the story of the squire. And when I tell this story to classrooms of children of many faiths, I love to ask them, who do you think the squire was? Do you think he was a real squire? What really happened? What questions do you have? Isaac Bashevis Singer's teacher said, well, what do you want to know, boys? And one of the boys said, well, did the squire come back with the other 500 and take the menorah? No, said the teacher. As far as I know, he never came back because the menorah was still in the family when I was a little boy, and it's still in the family now. Anyway, I get a lot of answers to who that squire was.
Tell us one.
Huh?
Tell us one.
Well, you know, a lot of the kids will say, was it Santa? And I said, well, maybe it was, but since this is a Jewish story, what the teacher probably said the kids should think about is maybe it was Elijah. The prophet Elijah is the figure in Jewish folklore who comes, and when people are worthy and in trouble and nothing, you know, there's nothing that can save them. He comes, but he never wants anybody to know that it was him. So Isaac Bashevis Singer has him in a number of his stories. So anyway, that's the story of the squire. And we have more stories to come. And our next story is from Claire Castell, and she has a story.
Well, first we have to acknowledge you.
Oh,
That's
Yes.
absolutely great.
That was beautiful.
That was lovely. Well done. Well
thank
done.
you. Well, check out Isaac Bashevis Singer. Yeah, it's also in his book called Stories for Children. Our next storyteller is Claire Castell, and she's a very familiar face, and she's got I think is a new story, Claire, yes, called
This is a new story I put together this year, just recently. And it's about luck. And, this time of year, you are sort of reflective of your life, of your past and your future. And so I think this might be a little bit timely. I hate to follow Liz because it was so moving. I'm still emotional from the story, but I'll try to launch into mine. Again, the story is called Luck. And those of you who know me, I'm never the person who wins the door prize at the party. I don't win at Lotto, and Publishers Clearinghouse never comes to my house, and my ship never came in. But I have had a really wonderful, lucky life. Now you think about luck, good luck is what you call it when you get what you want. Bad luck is the other outcome. You play the lotto, you win $500 is good luck. If you don't win anything, it's bad luck. But life is not that simple, Life is just not that black and white. For example, getting pregnant when my marriage was struggling was not a desired outcome, especially using birth control that was 99% effective. And it wasn't what I wanted. However, it turns out that little baby boy was the best thing I ever did. He was my Publishers Clearinghouse, the lotto, and the door prize. So was that good luck? I think so. Another situation, when I was getting a divorce, divorcing my husband wasn't what I wanted. Early on, I was waiting for the happily ever after. However, countless times, I cannot tell you how many times since that divorce, I have been out having the most fun of my life. And I would think, boy, if I was still married, I could not have this much fun. And I wouldn't have been able to dance the Argentine tango in Buenos Aires. I wouldn't have been able to travel to Tahiti, England, Italy, Germany, all those places. My husband would like to travel. I could barely get him to go to San Francisco. So these days, I don't see the divorce as a bad outcome. I don't see it as bad luck. Now, back many years, my parents died when we were children. I have a twin, Carol. Carol and I, and they died when we were young, and I'm not going to be putting a happy face on that, but we knew that my mother had 4 brothers. We had 4 uncles. So at that point, we thought it was very likely that we would go live with one of them. But none of the uncles stepped up to take us. And we ended up going with unrelated foster parents. And I found that kind of confusing as a child. And I knew Uncle Paul was well off, but we didn't hear from them during our childhood. And wasn't until our 30s, and that was about in the 80s, that we decided to go find Uncle Paul. And he lived in the Bay Area. He lived in Los Altos Hills, as it turns out. So we looked him up in the phone book, and remember those things? We found him and we went to visit. And by that time, I was raising my son. I'd put myself through college. I bought a house. I was building a really good career in Silicon Valley. And we visited Paul, and I found out that he put almost all his kids through college at Ivy League colleges. And he had 9 kids.
Oof.
Man, if he had adopted us, I could have gone to Stanford. Now, Uncle Paul was pompous and self-absorbed, but I'd had to work my ass off just to get that far in life, and might have been easy street if he'd taken us in. Well, years go on. After my retirement, I started to do ancestry.com, like a lot of people my age. And a couple of cousins from one of the other uncles found us. Now, these women lived in the South. They were very nice and enthusiastic about finding us. And soon the whole thing snowballed, and not only Uncle John's kids, but we started connecting with Uncle Paul's kids, and the 9 of them. But it was in the middle of COVID, and we couldn't meet right away. We are all making plans about getting together. However, one of Uncle Paul's kids, he's the rich uncle, remember, he decided to visit us anyway. So he lives in San Jose, and my sister came over, and we sat down in he invited himself, did I mention? Anyway, we sat down and drank some wine with him outside of my deck, and he drank a lot. He's telling us about his family. My sister has mental problems, and my ex-wife was crazy. And my father said your mother was mentally ill. And he finished this lovely bottle my sister brought, and then he had this backup case of beer and wine apparently he travels with all the time, and he's just still drinking. And I'm wondering, where does all this misogyny come from? And he proceeded to get drunker, and he made us pass at my sister, his first cousin.
Ew.
I know, right? Ooh. In October of this previous year, though, we finally did things lightened up enough so we could get together and some of the family could meet. I called it the Cousin Palooza. A luncheon was arranged in Pleasant Hill, not too far from me. The 2 women, the 2 cousins from the South, flew out, and we visited, and then we met up with 3 of Uncle Paul's daughters for that Cousin Palooza lunch. Specifically said I didn't want Brian there. So we sit down and we go around the table, and the women, Uncle Paul's daughters, are talking about life with Uncle Paul. It seems like they each received their own special brand of abuse. Each one had a story. Liz says, Uncle Paul would rage at the way we were dressing, just little things. And Alice says, and we were never smart enough for him. And Kathy, she was just so fragile and quiet. She didn't say anything. And therapy was a common theme amongst them. Every one of them had a story about how awful Uncle Paul was to them. Well, my sister Carol, my twin, had not been able to get off work to go that day. So that night I call her, Carol. Now I know our life was kind of messed up. Our parents died when we were young, but I tell you what, we might be the least messed up of all the cousins. I think we dodged a bullet with Uncle Paul. You know, and that's what got me thinking, you know, when you don't get what you want, sometimes your bad luck is really your good luck. You just don't know it yet. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Claire. Wow.
True
Life's
story.
turns and twists. You really brought us along. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad. Sally, I'm turning it over to you.
All right. Hello. Let's see. There we are. Well, another year has passed, hasn't it? And we've been together and had wonderful stories, and every month has just been such a joy. And I feel so grateful to all of you. And we have some very loyal listeners. We have listeners that just come in once and then we don't see them again. But it has been a charming experience, an experience of joy, and I'm just so grateful. Another year. Wow. So and a wonderful thing about having a swap where you're the hostess or whatever is that you get to have your own traditions. And so I'm going to tell a story that if you've been with us for 20 some years, you will have heard. And this is probably the 21st time you will hear it. And but it's my Christmas story, and I love telling it, and I hope you will come with me to another time.
We love hearing it, Sally.
Thank you, thank you. So Main Street was ready for Christmas. The light poles were festooned with red ribbon and silver bells, and Mr. Greger, the painter, the window painter, had been working for, maybe a month. He started with Santa's workshop on the hardware store windows. And there were the elves with screwdrivers and hammers and all sorts of tools which you could buy inside. And then next to that was Belk's department store. And across the windows flew Santa and his sled and the reindeer. There was no Rudolph because it was in 1940 and Rudolph hadn't come along yet. Santa Claus with his sleigh all through the windows. And then following that was a beautiful winter scene at Woolworth's Five and Dime. Do y'all remember Woolworth's Five and Dime? Anybody? Yes, at Woolworth's Five and Dime. It's the only snow I was going to see for years and years and years. It was just beautiful. And on our street, New Hope Road, fathers had been putting lights on the edges of the roof, and they were colored lights. There was no such thing as an all white light. Colored lights on the edge of the roof. There were wreaths on the door. Some of the fathers had taken ribbon and put it on the garage door so that it looked like a present. In our house, there was nothing but a whiny little girl in her living room talking to her mother. Why can't we have a wreath? Why can't we have some lights? Why can't we? Why can't? Sally, we're not having a wreath. We're not having lights. And I wish you would stop singing carols in the house. But what will Santa not know that I'm here? Of course, Santa will know. If you can stop whining long enough and become a good girl, I'll have your father write him a letter on business stationery. Tell him how good that you have been. You see, it was important for Santa to know because I had found the most wonderful gift, the most wonderful thing in the whole wide world. We were at Belk's department store going down the escalator to the toy department. And there, standing on the counter, was a Shirley Temple bridal doll. She was wearing a white satin dress with little pearls on it, and she had a veil that came down to the countertop and pulled around her feet. And when I pulled back the veil, there was Shirley Temple with a little mouth, rosebud mouth, and eyes that opened and closed. She was the most beautiful doll I had ever seen. I had to have that doll for Christmas. Well, I had my own campaign. Every night I would sing Christmas carols. I would open the window and sing Christmas carols really loud so the boss would hear me. And I even said a Bible verse that I had learned in school, and there were shepherds abiding in the fields. And lo, the angel of the Lord came to them and said, unto you this day is born a son in Bethlehem, and his name shall be Jesus the Christ. And I tried and tried really hard to be good. I really did. And then suddenly it was Christmas Eve. And my mother always had a wonderful Christmas party. And she invited the Spartanburgs and the Cones and the Greenbergs. They didn't have any Christmas trees either in their houses. And we had this wonderful dinner. And then for dessert, there was chocolate cake, a 3-layer chocolate cake. It was beautiful. And my father said, don't you think Santa Claus would like to have some of this cake? Sally, go get a china dish, a crystal goblet, and a sterling silver fork. And so I went in the dining room and found all these things. And then my father cut a big wedge of cake and we put it on the plate. And we took the plate to the living room window. Now, in all the other houses in the living room window, there were Christmas trees. In our house, there was a table and a white porcelain lamp. And I put the cake under the lamp and turned on the lamp so that it shone on the cake. And the crystal goblet sort of shone, and so did the sterling silver fork. And Daddy said, no Santa Claus could pass that up. And I went to bed that night very early, sang my Christmas carols, said my Bible verse, and went to sleep dreaming of Shirley Temple bridal doll. The next morning I woke up really early and went to the balcony of the second story and looked down to see if my father was in the office, and the light was on, and it was. And I ran down there, Daddy, did you look in the living room? Has Santa Claus come? Sally, we have to wait for your mother. Oh, please, Daddy, let's just go to the doorway and look. We walked down the hall and looked in the living room. And there, standing on the hearth of the fireplace, was the Shirley Temple bridal doll. And the veil came down and pulled around her feet. Oh, Daddy, and look. And next to it was a trunk, a vertical trunk. And on this side hung dresses. And on this side were little drawers. And if you pulled a drawer open, it had underwear in it. And this one had shoes. Oh, Daddy, let's dress the doll. We have to wait for your mother. Oh, Daddy, please. And my daddy in his blue silk pajamas and a bathrobe came and sat down on the floor with me. And we took off the bridal dress and we put on another little dress. And we were very busy playing with the doll when my mother appeared in the doorway. I thought you were going to wait for me. Oh, Mama, look what Santa brought me. The Shirley Temple bridal doll. And my mother sat down on the floor with me. Now, these were two very dignified parents, and there they were on the floor. We were all dressing this doll. What a wonderful, wonderful Christmas that was. Santa knew what I wanted, and he came, and he brought me the Shirley Temple bridal doll. Yes.
There she is.
Little.
She's beautiful.
Oh,
Wonderful.
I love your childhood story, Sally.
Wasn't I lucky? Yeah.
Really were.
Yeah.
Uh,
So And again, I must tell you how much I appreciate each and every one of you coming. It's been another astounding year, and do come back in 1923. And we'll see you again. We'll see you again. Liz, did you want to say any kind of goodbye?
Just Happy New Year, everyone.
Oh, yes.
Happy
Happy New
holidays.
Year. Happy New Year. And everybody say safe,
Power of light.
healthy,
Mhm.
and we'll conclude. I feel like we should sing something. I wish you a Merry Christmas. I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Bum, bum.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
And Happy New Year.
Thank you, guys. It
You
was beautiful.